Lesson 26, Section 2. This presentation will be covering the optative of verbs in omega and the present, future, perfect, and aorist optatives of those, and then look at some more conditional statements, future remote conditionals using the optative. Again, in all the forms of the optative, we see iota. So, as we saw with eme, we see a there in the beginning. That is epsilon iota. With verbs in omega, normal verbs, in the present, future, and perfect tenses of the optative, we see oi. So we still see the iota, but we see the omicron there. In the aorist optative, we see I primarily, but also, as we saw with ame, a. Any way you look at it, we're looking at different combinations, different diphthongs, really, with iota somewhere in them. So it's really the easiest way to spot the optative. For most optative endings, we simply substitute these diphthongs for the usual vowels. For instance, this is the present indicative of pao, I stop, etc. We're going to substitute that oi diphthong, omicron, iota, for all of the normal vowels, diphthongs we see here, like the omega in the first person singular, the epsilon iota in the second person and third person, etc. So we just plug all of those in, and we're only going to make two slight changes. To the first person singular, we're going to add me, pao oi me, is going to be the optative, the present optative, first person singular. And in the third person, we're going to change that oi sin to oi en, pao oi en. But that's effectively all that we have to do. Moreover, to get to the future, actually I believe we're going to start with we are going to do the future. All we're going to do is plug in that sigma, which is again a characteristic of the future tense, to get our future optative. No difference to the changes. No difference to the endings. Just as we saw no difference between the endings of the present indicative and the future indicative. Just that sigma added to the stem. For the perfect optative, we're going to see something very similar. We're just going to add our normal, perfect, reduplicated initial consonant and kappa there after the vowel or diphthong at the end of the stem. And that gives us the perfect optative. Next, we're going to look at the aorist optative, and here we're going to see a couple differences. It's no longer going to be oi, but primarily I. But first of all, let's take our normal stem and add the sigma as if we were forming the future optative, or taking one of the steps to form the aorist indicative. And we're going to change that oi to an I throughout the conjugation. And what we're going to see here, though, is that we have alternative forms in a couple places. Second person, third person singular, and third person plural. These I forms are actually going to be the less used alternatives. More common are these right here, where we still see iota, but we see that epsilon again creep back into there. So these are the forms of the aorist optative. We have a couple alternatives there. Now, let's see how we use them. In addition to open and unfulfilled conditionals, Greek also has remote conditionals or future remote conditionals, either way. These conditionals are hypothetical in nature and are formed as follows. So when we're talking about what might happen if something else were to happen, we're talking very much in hypotheticals here, we might use one of these conditionals. And we form it as follows. The protasis is going to be a if plus optative, and the apodosis is going to be optative plus un. We've seen un before with the subjunctive, but also with the optative in potential clauses. Here we're going to see it in conditional sentences. The protasis, again, is the if part of the conditional sentence. The apodosis is the then. We're going to see the optative on both sides in these remote conditionals. Now, how do we translate a remote conditional? Let's look at it. We have a couple different options. related to some extent to the options we have with the optative itself, but if I were to do something, then I would do something, or then something else would happen, or someone else would do something. We are talking about future possibilities. We're not talking about things that are contrary to present fact, for instance. We're not saying if I were you, for instance. That would be a different kind of conditional. If you want to say, if I were to become king, say, you might use one of these remote conditionals. If I were to become king, then I would, do something that I would do if I became king. Also, just a simple, in the English we might form it with just the simple past, with what looks like the simple past. If I became king, then I would declare something a holiday or something like that. If I were to become king, then I would declare something to be the case. If I became king, then I would declare something to be the case. Here we have two options really for the translation of this particular kind of conditional sentence. Let's look at some Greek to see this less in the abstract. Consider the following example. E kremata ekoimen, sorry, I mispronounced that first part. E kremata ekoime on pilus. So kremata is the plural of krema, which can mean thing, but in the plural it means something more like money. We've seen a variation of the sentence before. If we have money, we shall have friends. Here we're saying something a little different. Here we're using the optative in both the protasis, the first part of the sentence here, starting with the a, the if part of the sentence, and in the protasis, apodosis, with un. Now this means something like, if I were to have money, or if I had money, then I would have friends, or then I might have friends. If I were to have money, I would have friends. If I were to have money, I might have friends. If I had money, I would have friends. I might have friends. Again, different ways to translate this, but the important thing is that seeing the optative on both sides of the conditional sentence here, we know that we're dealing with a future possibility. It's remote, but it's still a future possibility. As in the other non-indicative moods, that is the imperative and the subjunctive, for instance, the difference between present and aorist in the optative is one of aspect, not of tense. This is important because when we see the aorist optative, which we just learned the forms of, in these conditional sentences, it's not necessarily going to be translated into English any differently than it would be if it were in the present optative. But the difference of aspect there is there in the Greek. So for the endings of verbs in the optative, for these omega verbs, these normal garden variety verbs, see pages 62 and 63. And for more on future remote conditionals, see page 187. Thank you very much.